Um, Everyone has a different reading of the Republic once you begin to take the book uh, as your own, which is a great experience. What the book is a matter for you to decide, and there isn't one reading of the Republic that is correct. I think it might be the case that Plato himself uh, had this in mind when he put the book together. I don't know, but there's all sorts of things we can say about the Republic, and to me, it is a mystery. After all these years, I have to say, a mystery. And I'll tell you my own personal sort of history of the Republic, because I've taught it many, many times as a philosophy teacher, not as an intellectual heritage or mosaic teacher, but as a philosophy teacher, where I chose the book um, most often for a course on human nature. Uh, that is, there's a course that's taught sometimes in schools about human nature. It goes under different names. And it seemed to me that this book has a very, very important and influential theory of human nature, which is basically laid out in book four. Um, that is, that it's there that it's revealed by Socrates that the classes of this crazy city that they have built, that the three classes of the city correspond to three parts of the self, and that the four central or cardinal virtues that they mention in book four, wisdom, courage, temperance, sometimes called moderation, and finally, and most importantly, justice, can be understood in the same way, both on the level of the city and the arrangement of the different classes, excuse me, and in the self, in the arrangement of the different parts of the self. This is all there, I think. I mean, whether it's primarily what the book is about, that's what I'm not sure. It's what, for many years, the book was about for me. Um, and so it seemed to me that this theory of human nature was developed in order to answer the question that Thrasymachus and others challenged Socrates with in the beginning of the book, and that is whether you're better off being just or unjust. That in order to answer that question, Socrates and Plato first develop a theory of human nature and then develop a theory of what justice means within the human self, as each part of this complex, this triad of parts, doing what it's supposed to do, doing its own work and not the work of another part, which would be injustice. And then finally, which is the hard part, I think, really trying to establish that you're better off with this arrangement of the self. That is, you're better off being just than unjust. And what that really turns out to be is that, I think, is that the just person is recognized by his or her, or the dominance of his or her rational intellectual part over the rest. That the unjust person is the person whose desires call the shots, in which our intellect, our mind, our intelligence is really in the service of desires, getting the satisfaction of our desires. And that would be, for instance, if you chose to be the money-loving person, the materialist. And the just person would be characterized by the dominance of the intellectual part, where the intellectual part called the shots, and on the basis of its knowledge, and especially its knowledge of the forms, what is right and good, that it called the shots for us. So we have a pretty clear, from that theory of human nature, we have a fairly clear way to contrast the just person with the unjust person. The just person is the person whose intellectual or rational part is dominant and in control. The unjust person is the person whose desires are in control. But of course, that doesn't really answer the question. That was the challenge. The challenge is to prove that the former, the just person, is happier and better off than the unjust person. And that's rather elusive in the book. That is, where exactly is that argued for? I think it's argued for in the so-called digression. I mean, books 5 and 6 and 7 are digressions from something. If you read it, if you come back to book 8, they say, well, now that this digression is over, we can go back to what we're going to talk about, these 4 parts, these 4 other constitutions, and these 4 other parallel arrangements of the self, types of city, types of person. So books 5, 6, and 7 were digressions, but it always seemed to me that it's within that digression that we get something like an answer to why the just life and being a just person is something that is superior to and something that you would want to choose over being an unjust person. And it finally has to do with metaphysics, with reality. I mean, that is, if the just person is a person whose rational part is in control, and if it's as he's tried to establish in books 6 and 7 in his defense of the philosopher and his notion of the cave and the education of the philosopher and the divided line, if it's the rational part of yourself, your mind, your intellect, your ability to think, that puts you in touch with what is really real, not the physical nature around you, which is connected up with your body through your senses and therefore with your desires. But if it's that rational part of you that allows you to see real truth and true reality, if it's something we can say, then it would seem that part deserves to rule over you. That is, if you ignore that part, you're choosing to live in error, or you're choosing to live surrounded by and occupied by what is less real, when it's your intellect that can put you in touch with what is most real. It seems to me, my own superficial thinking, that is ultimately the answer. That is that the reason that it's better to be just than be unjust, because of this theory of human nature and this theory of justice, what it means to be just. That ultimately the reason you want to be just is because you want to live in truth. You want to live in reality rather than live in illusion. And that's kind of the bottom of as far as you can get. That is, if someone says, well, I choose to live in illusion and falsehood, that is, to be occupied with the material things of the world that satisfy my desires, and those material things being only a superficial level of reality. If someone were to choose that, I don't think Plato would have a word to say at that point. Say, I've done my best. But the point I guess I'm trying to make is that argument, which I take to be the central argument of the Republic, is finished by Book 7. The theory of the allegory of the cave, the description of the philosopher's education and why that education is what it is and what it's finally leading to, just the forms, the dialectic, what the philosopher knows, that is over. And then I've always been sort of, well, since I began to think about it in any kind of like serious way, I guess, what are books 8 through 10 for? Why are they there? They're incredibly interesting. They have this really, they're crazy. If the book is crazy as a whole, in many respects, and I say crazy in the best possible way, an admiring way, then books 8 through 10 are the craziest parts. And they go into a lot of material that, frankly, doesn't seem to me to be essential to the central argument. I have my, I guess, reading through it this time, I don't have an explanation. Maybe Plato just, I don't even know if originally the Republic was divided up into these 10 books. I have to look that up. I'm thinking not. Maybe that was later editorial decision. What are these books for? What is Plato getting at? I can only say one thing, or two things. One, there's a change in tone in books 8 through 10, and it becomes joyful and playful. Secondly, I just can't help but have this feeling that the character of Socrates slips away, and that the author's voice, Plato, who is after all talking to his brothers, Glaucon and Adeimantus, that it comes through.